Pop Team Epic. Of all the anime that began playing in the spring 2018 lineup, this one stood out the most of the entire collection. Not only does the surrealistic humor of the show stand out from the usual suspects of what people typically associate with anime comedy, but a lot of people that already know of the show's existence prior to the anime were probably wondering, how in the hell would this even work as an anime? And to forge a little bit of context for the people that aren't in the know-how, Pop Team Epic is a short, 12-episode anime series based off a 4-panel webcomic by Bakub Okawa. Simply put, the webcomic and the anime follow the absurd adventures of two girls named Papiko and Pipimi. And that's really all there is to say about that. That's not to say that nothing at all happens in the show that can't be described or generalized to give you an idea of what it's about, but more so that the simple description of this just bizarre show simply isn't enough to actually, well, describe it. In some ways, to try to sum up this show in only a few descriptive words really gives a disservice to the amount of effort just put forth in all of its bits. In my opinion, the most simplest and easiest way to holistically sum up what this anime achieves at the end of the day is as the title of the video suggests, a lot of high effort put into shitposting. And before we get into this, I think it's important to at least put some kind of definition on exactly what I mean by the term shitposting. While there are a few variants of the definition for this word, in my own terminology, it describes the concept of making a post, or at least some form of content, often in response to something else that is deemed worthless or non-constructive. The response or post may be seen as a complete waste of time to create, or even read depending on the context. Yet at the same time, I wouldn't actually put the word effortless into the definition. Now, while this certainly doesn't apply to all things I would describe as shitposting, there has undoubtedly been times where just an extraneous amount of effort has been put forth into a response like this, and that is just really, at the end of the day, completely worthless as any sort of legitimate criticism or anything beyond just being entertaining. And while whether or not that shitpost is self-aware or even funny, if there's one thing to appreciate about it, it would just be the sheer effort put into some of them. And this, my friends, is where I think Pop Team Epic lies, as a really well done, thought out shitpost made public on Japanese television. Now, part of my reasoning for this stems not only from the content of the anime itself, but the tidbits of information about the creation of the show as well. An interview that was done with the producer of the show, Kotaro Sudo, really emphasizes this point, I think. Throughout the interview, you get a general impression that despite the amount of energy the team spent on this anime, he almost treats the thing like it's just one big, ridiculous joke. In the first question of the interview, when asked to tell the interviewee a little bit about his role in the anime, he said, quote unquote, "I'm credited as planning and producer for this series. So in other words, I'm the one you can blame for saying, I want to turn this into an anime." So right away you have the producer of Pop Team Epic already suggesting that the anime is far from a serious effort, at least in the traditional sense. And this becomes further exemplified when he, later in the interview, describes the creative process of how the various segments for this anime was created. As Sudo says, each creator is left to their own devices. I told them, if anything happens, I'll take the fall for it. And I don't give a lot of specific instructions for what they should make. I honestly cannot even think of the last time an anime earnestly took such an incredibly loose and creator-centric approach to the content of its anime. While this format would absolutely not work for most types of anime that actually exist out there, any with some sort of coherent story progression or plot, I still have to give Sudo some serious props for having the balls to take that kind of approach. And given the nature and attitude of the original manga, honestly, it makes complete sense to do so from a creative viewpoint. In a way, because of this decision, the show had almost become a Wild West for all the creators involved in putting their own unique vision through the various segments of the anime they were in charge in. While obviously most of the anime is at least somewhat based off original jokes of the manga, the writers and animators are, for all intents and purposes, given almost complete control of the product. This type of management already in and of itself gives leeway for what I'm referring to in the series as shitposting. And if just the pure existence of Bob Team Mimi isn't enough to convince you of this, consider the following. The French segments of the anime that are made in the traditional Japanese animation style are all created by just one person in the production team. They flew out a French animator that doesn't even speak Japanese and can only communicate through English all the way to Japan and gave him complete control of his animation segments after a production team member basically told Sudo, wouldn't it be funny if we gave him the manga and just let him do as he pleased? Despite the amount of money, sweat, blood, and time that went into producing and making this 12-episode series, the guys that were making it did not give a single fuck. So now, by this point, I think we have a good amount of background into the creation of this postmodern shit piece. But I think we need to talk about the show itself as well. What is it about the comedy and execution of the show that gives it this vague vibe of being shitposty, beyond just the context of its creation? And I think this can be fairly easily summed up in two general points throughout the anime. The most obvious one, at least from a visual standpoint, being the Bob Team Mimi segments. I mean, seriously? Do I really need to even say anything about what's happening right now? These grotesque manifestations of animation that seem like they were produced from Satan's fucking asshole, and also probably the guys from Galo Sengyan, is probably the most strangest avant-garde shit that I've ever seen made in the history of anime. And while there is a hell of a lot of strange anime that has been made over the years, I can't think of anything that comes even close to looking like this that wasn't just made as some cheap buck by some penniless, unknown company on a shoestring budget. And if Bob Team Mimi exemplifies from the visual standpoint the incredible amount of thought and effort that was put into this anime, then from the standpoint of jokes in the series, consider the fidget spinner. Yes, this seemingly random, incredibly tasteless joke that was put into the series to me exemplifies perfectly the shitposting nature that resonates throughout most of the series. Basically in this scene, this team of faceless generic villains are talking about how this show we're watching, based on a 4-panel webcomic, could not possibly dominate the spring season of anime, completely destroying what was barely left of the fourth wall by this point in time. And so, banding together, they come up with an answer to being able to potentially stop Pop Team Epic's domination of the current running anime season. A fucking fidget spinner. Yeah, that is the joke here. In fact, by the time this episode of the anime came out, the fidget spinner wasn't even fucking relevant anymore. So not only is this joke making an obtuse reference to an out-of-date pop culture meme for this scene, but the joke of this scene is specifically recognizing the fact that it is an outdated reference that couldn't actually garner any meaningful attention towards the villain's own potential anime show. It's just a desperate attempt at trying to stay topical and relevant in hopes of getting attention for their anime. The show completely breaks the meta of the existence of its own show, with these villains talking about their own show, while simultaneously making fun of its own meta within the same context by making the shitty reference that the creators themselves know is completely irrelevant to anything both having to do with the anime at all to its own relevance and culture at this point. Just an old, stale meme. So perhaps way before the start of this video, you didn't even think Pop Team Epic was that funny of a comedy show. Perhaps even after the points I made, you still don't think so. But you cannot tell me that after all this, at the very least, you can at least appreciate the art that is Pop Team Epic. Their seemingly uncaring yet very creative output has most definitely made them one of the most unique shows of the season. I highly recommend you check these guys out, even if you really haven't heard of them up to this point, because even if you don't find them funny, at the very least, it's pretty damn entertaining. Hey guys, thanks for watching my first ever creative video. Hope you guys didn't mind the kind of mediocre quality as I'm just trying to figure out this whole video editing process and video making process in general. But if you guys like what you heard, maybe consider subscribing as I make more potential content in the future. Thanks for listening.